Good evening. Could I invite everyone to get the last bit of cheese and coffee and come and join us at the seats? We're already live on TV on KMVT, and we'll be beginning the meeting now. I'd like to welcome everyone to a special meeting of the Human Relations Commission at the Senior Center, 266 Escuela Avenue at 7 p.m. on March 26th. Call to order. Roll call. Commissioners Boer, Commissioner Malik, Commissioner Ortiz, Vice Chair Ramirez, Commissioner Rosenberg, Commissioner Sheikh, and myself, Chair Coladonato. Oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the Commission on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. State law prohibits the Commission from acting on non-agendized items. I believe there is someone who wants, at least one person who would like to speak. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ethan Winston. I work in Valley Transportation Authorities.
Go ahead and take it from the top.
Hello, my name is Ethan Winston. I work with Valley Transportation Authority in the Community Affairs Department, and this seemed like a good opportunity to announce that on April 9th at City Hall at 8:30, and again at 6 o'clock we're going to have local projects open house. And so we're inviting everyone to come down and learn about the light rail efficiency project, the express lane projects that are going forward on Highway 85 and 101, the bus rapid transit on El Camino Real, and bus and light rail service in Mountain View and the surrounding area. And particularly the light rail efficiency project, another way to call that would be the Mountain View double tracking project. We are going to put a second set of tracks in, or we want to, between Mountain View and the Wisman station. And anyone that's ever sat on a light rail train that was sitting there waiting for the train coming the other direction on the one set of tracks is going to love this project. But we're going to have a lot of people in the room to answer your questions, so please come down. Again, that's April 9th. At 8:30, and then again at 6 o'clock at the Council Chambers, City Hall. Thank you. And there are flyers on the table back there that look like this.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone else? Kim, was there someone else that you knew wanted to speak? That's it. Anyone else with a comment on a non-agendized item? Okay, that brings us to item number 4, unfinished business. Sorry I have to go through the formality of an official meeting and all. Item 4, unfinished business. None. Item 5, new business. 5.1, Civility Roundtable Community Dialogue. The Human Relations Commission and the American Leadership Forum of Silicon Valley will hold a community dialogue entitled Transit Village, Traffic and Parking in Mountain View. Participants include former Santa Clara County Supervisor Ron Diradon Sr., former Mountain View Mayor Tom Means, co-founder of Friends of Caltrain Adina Levin, Josette Langevine from the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, Jackson Park Neighborhood Leader Karen DeMello, and Google Transportation Manager Kevin Matthey. The dialogue is facilitated by Chris Block, CEO of the American Leadership Forum of Silicon Valley. Residents are encouraged to attend, thank you for attending, and participate in the dialogue. No action will be taken on this item. Before I hand it over to Chris to take it away, I'd just like to thank Vice Chair Ramirez for doing all the legwork, coming up with the idea for this event, and doing all the legwork from the Commission side to get it set up. Which does not mean that Kim probably didn't get more work. Thank you, staff member Kim Castro. But also like to thank Commissioner Rosenberg for coming up with the idea for this event in 2011. And we've had one event every year since then. And I've always enjoyed them, and I thought they were a great opportunity to bring people from the community together and have a perhaps contentious but always civil discussion about matters on our minds. Thank you for coming. And Chris Block, I'd like to introduce you. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Some of you are going to get somebody's back for the rest of the evening. That's the nature of being in a circle. So I just want to do a couple things. I want to take a brief minute to set the context, and then we'll do a couple things before we move to the fishbowl. So the first thing I want to do is to thank all of you. You know, I have the opportunity to talk with a lot of people about this notion of why can't we have civic engagement that is both civil and engaging and makes a difference. And when I hear that, and particularly people point to Washington, D.C. and the stuff that happens there, and when I hear that from people, and when I'm in discussions about that, I really tell them, you should come to the city of Mountain View and see what's going on there, because what you're doing here really is the solution to a lot of that bigger problem that people are talking about. Because my sense is, if we want to have a more engaged democracy, a more civil yet impactful democracy, it's not going to start in Washington, D.C. It's going to start here in these rooms with all of us, right? And then move in that direction. So I want to thank you for doing something which I think from the standpoint of democracy, and certainly the community of Mountain View, is really, really important work that we're doing. And as you know, we've had some, I don't know if some of you have been to the previous ones, but we have not shied away from difficult conversations, and had definitely a lot of people in the room who disagreed with each other, who stuck it out and really engaged with each other. One of the ways we do that, and one of the ways we think that is, one of the things that we think is often missing, right, is that we don't spend any time getting in the right relationship with each other. And so, for instance, while the political process may sometimes require 7 people on or 8 people on a dais with a podium, and that is oftentimes kind of a recipe for contentiousness, or a recipe for not having it's hard to have a great conversation in that context. So we want to give people knowing that that is often necessary, we want to give people the opportunity to have a different kind of conversation. So there's no dais here. We're going to have a conversation with 6 people who are experts in the field. Do I have the number right? 2, 4, 6? Yep. 6 people in the field. And we're going to have a conversation with this group, which everyone will be able to hear and listen to. Then what we've done every time, and we'll continue to do it, is those 6 people will form smaller groups with you all, and we'll just rearrange the tables. And we'll ask a couple of similar questions in that small group. And then we will come together one more time as a large group to finish up the conversation. So it's an attempt that's been very successful in the past to create a different kind of conversation for people. A conversation where people are actually listening to each other and responding to what each other is saying, which is a novel idea when you think about it, but pretty important to having conversations that matter. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get ready to have that conversation. And at ALF, we do that in 2 ways. First of all, we're going to pause, and don't do it yet, but we're going to pause and take a deep breath. And then we're going to introduce ourselves to our neighbor, another novel idea that's often missing when we have these kinds of conversations. And if you know your neighbor, then, introduce yourself to somebody you don't know, and just let them know how you're feeling about being here. Again, we're going to take 2 minutes to do that. So first of all, everyone, a deep breath just to get here. Doesn't that feel great? And then just please introduce yourself to your neighbor.
No, I live in Alameda. So you say you lived in Mountain View a long time?
Yeah, for 25 years.
You look very familiar. You've been doing that for nearly 7 years.
I usher down to quality community nature things.
Where do you I ran Stanford transportation program. This is interesting. So I was in, we do some work in education. And one of the things we're prototyping is mindfulness in education. It's inside the school district. We have 100 teachers doing mindfulness training. And then I was I was very excited. It's an important back in the late 90s, Spain. I sat in a small group. We did mindfulness practice in small groups. And I sat in a small group. Went to the actual court system to kind of free up the teacher I talked to was a math teacher who ushered. The first 2 people I've met that ushered. I remember my first kid. She really loves it. He brings in the cards. You have to watch. Yeah, that's what she said. She really.
Steve Martin
Playing good prima facie.
driving 2 houses to go to.
Far more than Ben when they made the Constitution.
Driving's more of a culture.
Just burst your bubble. That's a whole.
Hopefully he has recovered.
Yes, he did. I think he did.
Yes.
I'm not next year.
7 years.
Okay, that's, so we could go on for a little while longer, but it's a good lesson to, you know, when you all begin meetings and have meetings, make sure that everyone in the room, you know, has a chance to say hello to each other. It's not only the civil thing to do, but in our experience, it really does, it changes the energy in the meeting if people actually know each other first as people before they only know each other as a position that they detest or whatever is causing the challenges. So now we're going to move to the fishbowl. We'll do that for a while. We'll move out to the smaller groups so everyone will have a chance to engage in this conversation with people who are very much involved in the issue in Mountain View. And then we'll wrap it up, and we will definitely, as is our custom, be out by 9. There's cheese, there's bread, there's coffee. You should all feel free, even if you're in the first row, getting up and getting that whenever you need to. Absolutely.
When you get up to get your coffee, cheese, and other delicious things, try not to walk in front of the camera over here. So use one of the other aisles, or else your face is going to be enlarged on TV.
All right. So again, thank you all for agreeing to be part of this conversation. Let me just set the context a little bit, although I know that we're all familiar with it. So the city's general plan has mobility goals and policies that reflect the community's desire to enhance its long-standing strategy of supporting alternative ways of travel and transit-oriented development. The city's long-term approach is to pursue innovative strategies to provide efficient and adequate parking, reduce parking requirements when appropriate, and to consider parking pricing to support alternative travel modes. So again, that's just the very broad context in which we're talking about. So the first question I want to ask, and any of you can start with the answer. If implemented, this vision that is contained in the general plan, if implemented, what does this vision look like? Namely, on the streets of Mountain View, what does it look like? And what are the practical implications of the vision for alternative transportation, or transportation generally in the plan?
I guess I'll start. The first thing that stood out during your comments was reducing the parking requirements, which I think leads to. Can you hear me?
Oh, sure.
Hi, I'm Kevin Matthew. I'm Google's transportation manager. The first thing that stood out with me is the reduced parking requirements, which ties into land use. And obviously, using land to build parking structures is not really a smart way of using that land. So I think there'd be a big benefit in other ways to use that land that you save by building massive parking lots or parking structures.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is one that jumped out at me. I'm Karen DeMello. I'm the Jackson Park neighbor person. In our neighborhood, the Prometheus group has decided to do this big apartment complex where social services is. And our neighborhood's very concerned because there's like one parking space per bedroom, and these are quite expensive apartments. And just when I drive by apartment complexes, you see now that ones that already have, you know, underground parking and stuff, like street parking's just full. When I drive by where I rented an apartment 30 years ago, the streets are you know, 3 times as crowded with cars, and they never used to be. And we just don't have that kind of room in front of people's houses to support that, and so it affects the neighborhood, is what I'm saying. So the reduced parking is a huge concern to me and to my neighbors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I'm Josette. I'm on the Mountain View BPAC. So I was in Oakland.
Which is the
What
Mountain
is
View.
the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee
Okay,
for the
good.
City of Mountain View. So I was in Oakland 2 weeks ago, and a friend of mine, she recently moved there from the South Bay. She has now had reduced parking, so they only have one spot for their for their complex. But the interesting part about that is that now she's walking more, now she's taking public transportation more. And so I think the whole, the effect of this is that people are finding that they can do that given the restraints. And I think that's what the proposal is. Is that going to work in the future? It just depends on how effective the streets are and how accessible they are for that type of environment.
And if I can jump in, so as I was on my way here and I was coming from the downtown Caltrain station on my bike, having had a previous meeting in San Francisco, and
Nicely introduced.
as I was coming along, I went by a couple, and he had a little folding bike that I guess he took on the train, and she had a child carrier. And I think some of this is, more of that. So more of us doing what we can, walking and biking. That does not work for everything. If you're going to visit a friend or relative in Cupertino or in Fremont on the weekend, you're going to be driving a car. But there's a lot of, most of our trips are very short. They're 1 or 2 miles or less. And, honestly, most of the time we're not, carrying like watermelons and, a year's supplies worth of pet food. And so many more people, not using a car for those short trips. And speaking of the parking issue, one of the things in Palo Alto, which has been having some similar situations, what they found was that if you reduce the amount of parking in a building and you let people park on the neighborhood streets for free, that is a recipe for a significant challenge. And one of the things that they have needed to go towards is a residential parking permit, which is a pain in the neck. It is, less ability to park wherever we want for free, but that does keep people from using those streets as a parking lot and enables people who do want to live near transit to use that and also spare neighbors.
See, I think my concern is, I think the theory is good, but does the infrastructure support that? And so I think my goal is to make sure that the streets are safe enough for people to be able to walk on them and bike on them before we start to kind of constrain them and constrict them in terms of parking and other things.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so Tom Means, former council member. So one of the first kind of seminars I went to was on parking, held by the planners and their associates and so forth. And it's amazing, I never thought about it, but most planning is set in stone in terms of parking requirements. And when they were set in stone was, you don't have to go back thousands of years, but they're set by engineers. Staff kind of goes by them, but they're inflexible and so forth. And the other thing I've realized, because during this, is we offer a lot of free parking in the city and so forth. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But, when we look at developers and their building, if they're going to build an expensive apartment and then tell a tenant, well, you have to pay $3,000 a month, but you don't have parking, I don't think that encourages people that they're going to bring their cars and so forth. So a lot of times I think we're kind of fly by seat, but if we provide free parking next to an apartment or a commercial building, people are going to use it. So unless you somehow come up with a way to restrict it, such as neighborhood parking permits or time limits, I think, you're just looking at, normal process, which is people will use the free parking if it's convenient to use it and so forth. So you can't control that. The parking studies we've done have always supplied sufficient parking, but you can't force people to use their parking spots. They might decide it's easier to park on the street.
Chris, if I may, let me apologize to everyone here. I had a little bout with the surgeon, and he took away one of my vocal cords. It's a hell of a thing to do to an old politician.
Yeah.
And so I have to talk like the Godfather.
It gives you even more credibility, Rod, than you normally have.
I don't know about that. I'm a past member of the County Board of Supervisors for 20 years, chaired the Transit Board during that time, and chaired the Caltrain Board and so on. So I have a little background on the county side, but let me offer a thought as you're proceeding to discuss this. You're solving macro problems with micro solutions. And that's what you need to do. Macro problems are things like climate change, like regional congestion that doesn't let Google get its people to work, so they have to create a huge bus fleet. And they shouldn't have to. Should be able to get to work, but they can't. And in a few years, the buses will be caught in the same traffic jams. Macro problems are urban sprawl that's eating up our last farmlands, our watershed lands, which are terribly important, especially right now with the droughts. And those are the kinds of macro problems that Mount View really is on the cutting edge of solving with micro solutions, and all compliments to you. But realize that you can't do that doing things the way you've done them for the last 100 years. Tom's right. Engineers have set these policies back when you had a whole lot of land and it was cheap, and open freeways and cheap gas and no air pollution, or air pollution that was small enough so it didn't kill people or fry the planet. Now though, we're up against crises, and we all have to do the right thing on a micro decision basis. Otherwise, your friends won't follow you, and you're the leader. Let me tell you, Mount View is the leader in Santa Clara County. All the other cities are still trying to create only tax base, no housing. They don't want to reduce parking. My goodness, no. They may not be able to attract developers. So you're setting the pattern for the county and possibly the state, and you need to do it aggressively. You have to reduce parking. You have to create integrated bike paths and walking trails. You have to create high-rise dwelling units mixed in with your industry so you can walk to work. Now, those are all things that are obnoxious in terms of traditional planning, but they have to occur now. It's going to be inconvenient for some of the neighborhoods until we adjust, but then it's going to be a lot better.
Well, it's inconvenient now. When I try to get from my house to 101 at 9 or 10 in the morning, it takes a half hour to go 1.5 miles. And I don't do that anymore. I avoid it. And this is like concert traffic. And Shoreline Amphitheater's been there for years, and you know when the concerts are going to be, and you avoid them. But every single day, and then we're going to bring 15,000 more jobs, and everything's gridlock now. So this is hard. And in the future, it's scary to think, you know, like people are going to be doubling up on potentially in apartments, because I see this already. You look at places that used to have single people living in them, and you see families living in them and people sharing apartments, and there's way more cars in these older apartment complexes now than there were 10, 20 years ago, and in 10, 20 years from now, our neighborhood's going to suffer even more. I totally agree, Josette, with what you said about making safety important. Moffett is dark. It's scary. There's more cars parked on the street, so it's harder to bicycle. I'm all in favor of, why aren't the green bike lanes painted already? If we're going to be on the forefront, let's paint our bike lanes green. Let's put lights out, and let's put flashing lights where pedestrian walkways are to make it safe. Start small. And anyways, yeah.
Building on what you were saying and what Rod Deardown was saying, one of the really admirable things that I see Mountain View as having done, and this is looking and comparing it to the other cities on the corridor, Tommy's mentioned engineering, and the original parking standards were based on engineer studies, but engineer studies based on places that had no transit, that had completely separate land use, so you couldn't walk anywhere, and that was where they had come up with the accounting. But what Mountain View is actually doing is using engineering, using analytics, but changing the math, looking at it in a different way. And for example, in North Bayshore, what they did was, brought in consultants and said, how much can we reduce driving? And came up with a numerical goal, and then is weighing the different investments to say, well, what do we need to do to improve connections to the Caltrain? What do we need to do to improve the bicycle connections? What are all the steps that we can take to invest and plan? Because the old planning way was about planning for almost everybody to drive. And the new planning way is to say, okay, we can be rational about it and assume, so at Google, less than half of employees drive today, and at Stanford, where Kevin Matthey used to work, less than half drive. So when you say alternatives, at these places today, driving is the alternative, driving is the minority. So when you say that you're worried about the impacts and the negative, that could happen, but with this new way of planning that Mountain View has adopted, that's a way to look in and verify if the bad things are happening or
And
not.
before you
Yeah.
respond,
Yeah.
what I want to test something just to move the conversation a little bit. Are we saying that is there, at least in the short term, a necessity to make trade-offs? So I guess the question is, I'm not saying the trade-offs are worth it yet, I haven't gotten there yet, but is the question that we can concurrently, plan for safer streets and reduce parking requirements, et cetera, and that people will have fewer cars and drive less, right? Or is it that we have to somewhat force people out of their cars, so by lower parking requirements, et cetera? And is there at least some short-term trade-offs? I mean, is the sense that unless we do these things that create short-term traffic issues, we won't get to the longer-term vision, or are we doing these things concurrently? Because the question is, because really the question is, in some ways, right, are there trade-offs? And if there are they reasonable trade-offs given the vision of the plan? That's the question. Let's drill down a little bit, because we can go to the policy a lot, right? But then it really has to do with, in some ways, are there trade-offs? And if so, are they reasonable trade-offs given what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think in transportation, there's two fundamental trade-offs by taking public transportation. It's time and convenience. And so those are the two elements that you would have to address to make the time inconvenience palatable, or offer some incentives so that it loosens the pain of the inconvenience that will happen.
Well, I think there are certain trade-offs that are unacceptable. So if the trade-off means, and your latter option of forcing people out of their cars in order to get to where they need to go, if those streets that they're crossing, they're getting out of their cars to go to are not safe, then I don't think that's an acceptable option or a trade-off for anyone. Because what you'll have are people who will get hit by cars, who will not find parking for their bikes, and do strange things to cross roads. I mean, that's just not an option, I think, to myself. And if that's a trade-off, then that can't happen. I just, I don't think it's right.
And just to add, I think in Google's approach is always the incentive versus the stick. So we try to find things that would motivate people to take alternatives versus forcing them by, charging for parking or restricting parking. And it seems to do a lot. We seem to be doing fairly well in that realm, and people accept that a little easier than being forced or not allowed to do things. One thing, though, we haven't talked about, and to some of Rod's comments, is our public transit infrastructure. The VTA system, the Samtrans system, even the Caltrain system. If you do impose restrictions per se, you've got to give people other alternatives to get to their final destination. And one of those things should be public transit. And I think we all agree that VTA could use a lot of help in that area as far as providing the adequate transportation that's needed in this area.
But is it a reasonable, just before I want to continue to push this a little bit, right? So we're talking about things that are in the future that seem to make sense. Safe streets, better transportation, all these things, and I think we can point to places where they've made a difference, right? I mean, I think But I want to come back to the simpler question, right? Quite frankly, is, you know, if there is a gap, right? If there is a gap, then the trade-off that so safe streets are, but if there's a gap between when there's going to be a reduction in car usage and we get these other things, what is a reasonable trade-off for someone like Karen or somebody? What's
So we're making trade-offs today. So when I come to downtown Mountain View, I'm almost always here on public transit or a bike because the driving is a pain in the neck. But when I do drive and I have to circle around the block looking for parking because parking is free, and therefore there's no incentive to park in a garage further away. There's an incentive to look for the free spot nearest where you're going. That's a trade-off now. And I would rather pay $1 and know I get a parking spot, or like have a sign telling me where the spot is. So that circling is a trade-off I'm making today. Another trade-off. So actually, bike and pedestrian infrastructure is relatively cheap. Highway interchanges cost tens of millions of dollars. And bicycle infrastructure, including very good bicycle infrastructure, is cheaper than that. So there may be some ways that are cost effective to get to what we want for cheaper. Another trade-off that we're making today is in the communities, as rents are going up because the housing supply is not keeping up with demand, is displacement. We are seeing people who've been living in the community for many years being forced to leave because of the rising rents. That's a trade-off we're taking today. So, some of the things that we're talking about doing will be on the plus side.
Chris, if I could go back to your trade-offs issue and applaud your idea of attempting to have trade-offs that are positive and support Google's position there. But note also that in the main, we're beyond the ability to control the positive trade-offs. When Apple's development goes in and the supporting industry, remember, Google just doesn't create another couple of million square feet. They have a couple of million square feet, but then all these supporting industry also expands. And that's good. We want that. We want our kids to have jobs. But when that happens, it would be unconscionable to build enough parking to park all the cars for those people. It would be inappropriate use of land in our valley. So it's beyond our ability to control positive trade-offs. Negative trade-offs are going to occur. The most serious one is going to be a vast increase over congestion. It took me an hour and 15 minutes to go from Palo Alto to San Jose yesterday. It was in the middle of the day. An hour and 15 minutes. And there were no wrecks. It's just congestion. And it's going to get much, much worse. Now that's a negative trade-off. It's going to force people out of their cars. So we better build a transit system. Now the manufacturing, the leadership group, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, is going to bring forward a tax measure in 2016. The industry is going to support it. We need to make sure that gets 2/3 vote, so we can build the rest of the light rail system, extend BART into through the county, and so on, so that we have a real interconnected transit system instead of bits and pieces.
Trade-offs. So for me, the big trade-off is what is this utopian dream versus what is reality in my neighborhood? And it's hard to know. It's a bit of an experiment. The thing is, it's going to be an experiment that's going to have a long-lasting impact. So I think we need to think this through and take all considerations. Your point, Rod, about Google parking, I totally understand. In terms of apartment complexes and condos going in, I have a whole different feeling on that because it affects nearby neighbors. I go to parks a lot, the ones that charge money. I was at Alum Rock City Park in San Jose a couple weeks ago. there was miles of cars parked, and I thought, what's going on? It's the people who don't want to pay for parking, and you see this everywhere. People park in the neighborhoods to avoid, and I go to Castle Rock State Park. People are parked for miles. I have a pass because I'm a state parks member. I go in the lot, there's 3 cars in the lot in the morning, and then of course when there's nowhere else to park, then those people end up having to pay. So I don't think it's fair for the people who are in place to have to suffer that with cut through streets. You talked about time and convenience, and I totally agree. That's why people are cutting through neighborhoods, because they don't want to wait for the light. Are people who are speeding through neighborhood streets going to want to ride a bike instead? I don't think so.
Well, one thing that you can think about is maybe shifting the trade-off. An example I would use is biking versus driving a car. If you could design your infrastructure so it's faster to get to point A to point B via bike versus via car, that's a motivator that would encourage more people to ride a bike, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, again, the issue comes down to supplying a lot of free parking. In the situations you described too, why pay for parking when there's some free parking nearby and so forth. So, I've tried to push neighborhood parking permits. I teach at a school. I can't park in the neighborhood parking permits. Both my kids went to schools. They couldn't park in the neighborhood and so forth. So, they may be costly, but if people really want to resolve the parking issue, they've got to ration the parking in some reasonable way. And again, if you don't ration a free good, it gets consumed, and that's where it is.
This is why we like to have an economist on the panel at all times.
Right. So and there are some economists that have studied. Donald Stroop is done a lot of stuff on parking. I don't agree with all his market mechanisms. I think they're not that market friendly, but at least he acknowledges there are ways to improve parking and ration it better, and so forth. And again, even time constraints, turnover parking and stuff like that. Now, we have in Mountain View, and I forget what other town is in it, 10-hour parking limits. Okay, and the time frame is 11 or 12 hours. So, I used to violate parking rules by San Jose State all the time, and when the guy's going to come chalk your car, you park, you move.
You can say that now that you're not on the council anymore.
And then, but the point is, you have to have serious time constraints if you're really concerned about turnover and things like that, and overnight parking, and so forth. And you don't even have to charge for parking; just put time constraints or serious time constraints, and enforce them. And I know sometimes, we like to have the police be nice guys and not do stuff like that, but, that's the reality in terms of, otherwise you're going to have first come, first serve. And, parking is first come, first serve if it's free.
I come from New York, from the city of New York, and that's a huge metropolis, and they have paid parking on the streets. And I feel like we're trying to make Mountain View into a mini metropolis instead of what it is. We're kind of the suburbs. And I think what we're getting is people, if we do have this paid parking system, people are going to start parking in the residential areas, and that's going to create a nightmare. I think what the problem is that we really need to kind of focus on what our city is. It doesn't have the means or the transportation system to go from here to there very easily, and so people are forced to use their cars. I mean, that's just the way it is, or the streets are just not attractive to walk or to bike, unfortunately, and that's something that I'm hoping to kind of help alleviate a little. But paid parking, I don't think, is the final answer. I really don't. I think it's just, we're trying to make something work that wasn't designed to work that way.
Well, I mentioned other things besides paying, other types of constraints that are possible that still have an implicit price. If you only can park 2 hours, that imposes some cost if you're going to be there longer than 2 hours.
I'd like to tactfully and respectfully really disagree with you. Mount View cannot continue to be a suburban community. I apologize, but if you think that, you're naive. Google's going to be expanding, not a little bit, but a lot. Other industry supporting Google and other headquarters industry will expand in Mountain View and in the adjacent area. Now, where are the people going to live? You can't say, go live someplace else. That's not being a good urban neighbor. You have to, Mount View, Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, Cupertino, have to begin housing their industry. When you do that, and you recognize the requirement for doing that, you recognize that you're not going to be the way it has been for the last 100 years. The areas over your transit stations, and that's where you can focus growth, need to become high-rise developments with very minimum parking to encourage people to live there, to use transit. They move there because they want to be on top of transit. Well, you couldn't put, because you got a lot of transit. We spent billions of dollars to put transit that connects to other places into Mountain View. You can put tens of thousands, certainly, maybe more, dwelling units on top of those parking lots that are associated with those transit stations. And those people aren't going to encumber your roads because they're going to become transit users. They're going to move there because they're transit users. And they're going to use a transit system as a horizontal elevator instead of the second car, which you don't want on your roadway. But unless you take that bold move, unless you begin talking about 20, 30-story condominiums on top of that transit, and allowing people to use transit as their primary device for getting to work, unless you take that bold step, you're going to be fighting commutes because people are going to come to work at Google. It's a great place to work. And if you add 15,000 Googlers and all the other industry around them, they're going to have to commute from Merced and Santa Cruz and Fresno, and that's going to mess up your roads and choke your air. So let's have the macro vision and realize micro local decisions have to be made to support the accomplishment. That's the only way you're going to be able to protect the single family character of Mountain View, is to densify heavily on top of and around the transit stations.
I'm going to not so much have a different point of view, but ask a different question about that, because as far as I can tell, and I'm a student myself of some of these planning topics, I don't have a degree on it, but in order to have a really wonderful, very walkable community where most people can walk and get a lot of the necessity of life, where you might have a car but you don't need a car for the necessities of life, you don't need high rises. You can have medium density buildings and build out neighborhoods in a way that feels nice and comfortable and have green and not look like Manhattan, and still have some place that is not so sprawled and spread out that parents feel like they need to drive their child to school and people feel like they need to drive to pick up a toothbrush from the drugstore. And I think that comes to, well, how many people are here? If we have jobs growth, what does that mean? If we have jobs growth and everybody drives, we've clogged freeways, that doesn't work. So how many people do we want to be here? And then what kind of pattern, and it's not just about density, it's about what's the street like, what are the buildings like, what's the neighborhood like, is there places for people to have recreation, that kind of thing. And so as far as I can tell, it's possible to do that without the high rises, but it requires community planning for what kind of character you want. I don't think you can have it, but you also can't have the same proportion of single family homes, and the demographics are different too. If you look to Kevin and say, well, out of the people that you're transporting first of all, you know, how many would prefer to live someplace that they don't have to drive versus, you know, living in a single-family home, you have to drive everywhere, you would get a different set of answers.
So I'm gonna take a
Yeah.
couple more minutes where we talk about
Yeah.
this longer-term vision, and then I'm gonna bring people back to the current reality and what are trade-offs, et cetera. So a couple more comments on what this future vision might look like.
Kevin, I'll be quick and respectful, but Adina, if you try to do it without creating high-rise on top of transit, not everywhere, just on top of your many transit stations and parking around transit. If you try to do it with low-rise, 4 or 5 stories there, then you're not going to house your jobs. You're not going to come close to housing the jobs that Google and others want to bring here, and you want them to bring here, because it's jobs for your kids. And that means those people are going to have to live other places, and they're going to have to commute longer distances. Not a few, but you're talking about ultimately probably 100,000 people who are commuting into Moffett Park. Now, that isn't going to work. That means the end of operating streets in Mountain View. So you've got to cluster that in high-rise developments to protect the single-family character of the rest of Mountain View. That's the trade-off. If you want to have low-rise developments on top of transit, then you have to have low-rise multi-family developments across the city to accommodate the growth you want in industry.
Okay, and I
So
think,
let's, before we, so Tom, did you have something to?
No, I'll wait for your
So
announcement.
what I want to do is I want to bring us back a little bit. So there's been a lot of talk about the longer term vision, and it seems that, unless you all tell me I'm wrong, here's what I'm hearing. That there is this longer term vision. We're not exactly on the same page necessarily, but the longer term vision involves some kind of growth or change, possibly, right? And there's this current reality, right? And there's been some discussion that, you know, in order to get from this current reality to this long-term vision, there are sacrifices or trade-offs that are currently being made. This was to Karen's point, right? So I want to spend a little time talking about what is the shorter-term vision? What is the, if there is this current reality and this long-term vision, what are the kind of things we should be doing sooner rather than later? I want to talk a little bit more, for instance, around charging for parking or bike lanes, or so what are how do we mitigate, or how do we sort of manage, at least in the interim period, some of the consequences that happen when you try to go from here to there? This is what, a little bit, bringing it back to the streets of Mountain View today and 3 years from now. Does that make sense? Okay, please.
There's a lot that can be done now in terms of making things safer, as Josette's mentioned. I already mentioned those flashing lights for pedestrians to cross streets downtown. I stop at almost every single crosswalk because I can't tell if anyone's coming at night. It's dark, everyone wears black. Exactly. Just making crosswalks wider, not skinny sidewalks, wider sidewalks to promote walking. I'm all in favor of walking. I'm all in favor of bicycling. I'm also trying to be realistic about these apartments that only have 1 parking space per bedroom, which I think is going to cause problems. And I worry about people changing jobs in the future. So what can we do now? I think small steps to clean up what we've got, right? And try to deal with the traffic gridlock and parking issues we have today, because there's a lot that we can deal with today without thinking in the future.
If I could just touch on the biking, to Josette's comment about Oakland, I live in Alameda, and I was somewhat surprised and a bit shocked that they actually have green bike lanes in Oakland, but we don't have any here in this region. The other comment about cycling is each city in the region has their own independent bike plan, and they may not mesh with the adjoining city's bike plan. So you have examples where you've got a bike lane on, say, Middlefield, but when you get to Embarcadero, it goes away. And so we have to look at ourselves as a micro region, if you will, Palo Alto, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, maybe a few other cities, and you've got to work collectively in order to improve the connectivity of cycling, improve the connectivity of all sorts of things. So this is considered one region versus an independent city.
Tom?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, this discussion we just had on high-rise, low-rise, I don't, we built the Avalon Towers, which were 9 stories. We haven't built anything like that yet. And so we're not even getting to what Rod would like yet, and we're still getting a lot of pushback on our growth. And I think, the growth we have, I think, is a diverse housing stock, which is making housing more affordable for some people, not everyone, but it provides housing for people that want to live here. And I look around towns nearby, I won't mention the town nearby, that basically builds single-family homes, on large lots. And if that's a death trap, because all you do is end up with expensive housing, very little downtown, and so those people come here to enjoy themselves, and rightly so. We have more to offer. But I think that we look at this, everyone gets a chance to have input. We have staff that look at parking and traffic congestions. We do studies and so forth. So by the time a project comes before the council, it's been vetted very well. And whether you agree or disagree with the stuff, I've always looked at the stuff, and everything gets vetted. And in most cases, the things that are more serious problems have been mitigated and so forth. And so I'm not concerned about the growth that's happening in this town, because we have a lot of jobs, land becomes expensive, people are gonna, want to live here, but, they're gonna have to pay for smaller units and so forth. And so, that's kind of what happens. So I don't, we're not a suburb anymore, we're more like an urban area. And, as I always tell people, we could get rid of all the jobs and go back to being a 1950s town if that's what people want. But, no one wants that approach, but that's how you balance jobs and housing if you're not gonna build the housing. And we build diverse housing. We're building a lot of apartments now. That seems to be the market now.
And so in terms of things that can be done now, one of the things I believe is at Kevin Matthews' tenure at Stanford, when the Santa Clara County said you can grow your buildings as long as you do not add a single new car trip.
Can't hear you.
You can grow your employment, you can grow your buildings, just don't add a single new car trip. And one of the things that they did early on is to give Caltrain Go passes, deep discount bulk purchase transit passes. And right now a big company can do it. Mountain View is starting to be able to create a pool so that not just the biggest company can do it, but a pool of people maybe downtown can do it. And Boulder has one of these programs that makes it available for a neighborhood, that if a neighborhood agrees, you can get the discount transit passes, and the neighborhoods that have these drive 40% less than average Boulder residents. We will need to gently persuade our transit system to adapt their program to do that, but that's something that changes behavior very quickly, as we saw in Stanford and they saw in Boulder. Tom Means said, well, the developments are vetted, but one way to step up, which Mountain View has on the books, but to carry through, is to have those things, the trip limits, transparent, monitor, watch. So are people fulfilling that, or are they not? Are we getting the side effects, or are we not? The transparency. And then if we're doing those transit passes and we have the ballot measures, we need to make sure that we're funding that transit, so when people have those transit passes, there's space on the train. And Caltrain, when they electrify, can actually add more cars to the train, but we'll need to help pay to make that happen so it can carry the people who aren't driving and causing traffic.
So we're going to take a couple more comments, then we're going to take a very brief break, and we're going to move out to giving people here a chance to engage in this discussion with each of you as well. Kevin.
I guess in my vision of the future, transit is free. free bus, free Caltrain. When you look at the fare box recovery, you're not really talking a lot of dollars and cents. And I think those are sorts of things that we really have to consider if we really want to shift things significantly versus just moving the needle just a little bit. I think we really have to do some radical things. At the Caltrain, I love that they're electrifying Caltrain, but my concern is by 2020, it will be maxed out, and then what do we do to get to 2040? We really have to break it apart and rebuild Caltrain, double tracking, a baby bullet system like they have in Europe, that we have high frequency, high speed, that we can really carry the capacity that this region is going to need in 2020, 2030, and so on.
Well, I think not only that, I think we also need to build our transit system. So Caltrain only goes from one section of Mountain View to the other section, but it's on the same side of Mountain View. There's nothing really like internally in Mountain View except buses, which people don't seem to be using. And so I think the question is, why aren't they using them? They're more using the Caltrain, which is nicer and probably more pleasant to use. And I actually do agree with you, Rod. I think that we are becoming more of an urban society, but we're still stagnated because our transit system isn't that developed. And I think that's the issue. I think once it does become more developed, we'll see like the fruits of hopefully what we're planning. But yeah.
Sorry.
Then I'm going to finish it, and then everyone's going to have a chance to make a
Okay.
concluding. That's great.
I was
That
just
makes
going to
sense.
say, Mountain View has been doing such wonderful things for decades. Supporting the Stevens Creek Trail early on has been fantastic. The recent bike bridges that have gone over Highway 101 and Highway 85 are just fantastic. And I feel really proud to live in Mountain View, and I hope we can continue to do these things that make sense and have a good balance here in the city.
And one thing that I'm really
Hold it, no, I'm going to be, this is like on the radio, the music is going to start playing pretty soon, this is the problem, so, Tom, Rod?
I guess my concern is that it takes 20 years to build a rail system from the time you start planning. Now, some of our completion of our project, which we all believe has to be done, is planned. So we're probably 10 years from having it done. But in that period of time, we're going to have virtually terminal gridlock. And our buses are going to be caught in the same gridlock. So we've got to move quickly. And Mountain View's the easy one. You guys are progressive. You're ready to go. Think of the other 14 cities in the county. And you realize there's a challenge out there.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So let me explain what the rest of the evening holds so that people can understand that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little bit of a break. We're gonna take a 10-minute break. So be here back at 8:10, an 8-minute break. And then what we'll do is we'll have 2 or 3 questions as a result of this discussion, right? And what we'll ask you to do is, and this is what we do every time, you will rearrange your chairs so that you're in a circle together. This group, this group, this group, there'll be 5 or 6. We'll just do that together. Each of the fishbowl participants that can stay will go to one of the groups, and I will pose 2 or 3 questions, and the group will, so that you all will be able to have this same or a similar conversation. Then we'll come together as a larger group. So come back at 8:10, because we want to make sure that we have enough time to talk with each other.
So are we done? Are we done?
We're going to participate in the small discussion,
The small group.
but
I'm going.
take a break. Well, you just got here.
Back in your seats, everybody.
So Jackson Park is kind of between Sterling and Shoreline, which I used to live over on Shoreline and Middlefield.
So it's really close.
I used to live there. Yeah. And in fact, my friend's kid used to live in there by Jackson Park. But those, not in the new condos, but they built those new condos there in the new park there, which is nice. Yeah. I go there when I cut through, when I ride my bike.
I'm sorry.
I know. Well, that was the thing, because cutting off the other entrance to Central. Most of the people that came lived on the other side, sideways. They lived on. Yes, most of the people that came.
My neighbors. I'm on. I would say of the neighbors in my area.
Okay, so now that everyone is seated, because it's approaching 8:15, what we're going to do is continue
Driving through the neighborhood there. That's it. So you want us to keep it open so you can drive through their neighborhood. Yeah. Where do you live?
Right behind.
You live in Okay.
Okay, now, so what we're going to, can you hear me? So what we're going to do now is continue the program. So it's at the point now, if you're still talking, good.
Then with the paid parking stuff, one of the reasons I got my house where I live, it's near the end of a private neighborhood, was because I like to have parties.
So at this point, you're probably, if you're not seeing it, you're still talking.
On Central Avenue and stuff.
And you're keeping us from continuing the program.
Which I don't.
And we really want to continue the program.
But,
So we're going to start now.
social services parking for years.
Excuse me.
Now that's going to go. Yeah.
It's just, I like seeing this.
What about the, I go to events at the Portuguese Center.
Those crab feeds, they spill over. It doesn't really bother me too much sometimes. It's a special thing. It's not.
We're starting now. We're starting now.
There too.
But they don't use it as parking areas. Some of the crab feeds do.
No, I'm going to do a couple things.
Everyone does a crab
When
feed.
people live in stuff, that's okay. It happens once a year.
Well, I'll definitely continue.
Well, that's, I have a daycare center that does that. When they have parent events, they park in our neighborhood.
So everybody, I just want to be clear that
We haven't been suburban.
it's actually a really good sign when it's hard to get people back together because you guys are enjoying the conversation. But I really want to get people into small groups. So take a minute and actually set up the chairs.
Say, Kevin, does Google have any incentives to
You should go out to each of these groups.
okay,
One of you to
to
each group.
try to find people to work there who live in Mountain View or
This is best practice right here.
Good question. I really don't know what our
Nice to be done.
because I know people there that get new jobs now within your house.
That's a good question. I really don't. I'm not sure what that is.
Find a group I don't know anymore.
We're making progress. Keep doing it. Okay, everybody. This group, absolutely. Okay, a couple things, everybody. We're going to take 1 minute to make sure we have a great conversation. So the first thing to do, the first thing is just take a minute, right, and make sure we did a little room rearranging. Just make sure that everyone in the circle is comfortable and that you've set up the circle in a way that you're going to be able to see each other and nobody's sitting apart, you know, nobody's sitting away from each other. Just take a minute to make sure that you've formed a nice circle because it'll really make a difference in the conversation. And now I also want to share with you that this is the point in the evening where you kind of have a choice to make, right? We're going to give you a couple of questions because what we find, right, is that oftentimes people get in the same rooms and have the same conversations with the same people and expect a different result, right? And so part of this is that if you come to a lot of meetings and you have a 3 to 5 minute prepared speech that you always give, the good news is everyone's already heard it, right? So you don't need to say it again, right? So one of the things we're going to do, or you can, I mean, if it's necessary, but one of the things we're going to do is we're going to ask a couple of questions. And I think you'll find that if your group makes a commitment to actually answering the questions as part of the beginning of the conversation, then you might have a conversation that's a little bit different than you've normally had and moves the conversation forward a bit. And again, this is just suggestions of we've had a few of these and I think people have found it really helpful. So we're going to riff off of the conversation that you saw here, and in some of your groups there's definitely somebody from the Fishbowl in your group. And I'd like to ask, we're going to ask in effect 3 questions. Right? And I'll repeat them. So the first is, if implemented, what does this vision look like? What are the practical applications of this vision? Right? Quite frankly, a lot of people in the Fishbowl had some pretty clear ideas about that, and I was hearing some comments that not everyone was as clear. And this is the chance to talk about those things. So what are the implications? What is this vision, and what are the implications of it? Number 2 is, what are the trade-offs associated with these strategies? And this is a 2-part question. What are the trade-offs associated? We talked a lot about that in the Fishbowl. What are the trade-offs? And is everyone being asked to make those trade-offs equally? Because this is really where the rubber meets the road with trade-offs, right? People don't mind making trade-offs oftentimes if they're being made by everyone, right? Or people don't like making trade-offs as long as they don't have to make them, right? So this is why it's an important question. And then the last question, right? We're going to have about 30 minutes, so there's actually some good time to have a discussion. Is achieving this goal or this vision, this transportation vision, of is achieving this goal important to me, right? And I will tell you that we will get to this question because when we have about 10 minutes left, I'm going to push the group to have this conversation because this is sometimes the conversation that's missing. Is achieving this goal important to me? And if so, what am I willing to sacrifice in the short term to achieve this long-term goal? Or not, right? Because this is really sometimes the essence of the discussion. So that's the direction we're going to move in. So the first question is, if implemented, what does this vision look like and what are the practical applications? Question 1. Question 2, what are the trade-offs? And is everyone being asked to make those trade-offs equally? And number 3, right, is achieving this goal important to me? And if so, what am I willing to sacrifice in the short term to achieve this goal? And if not, what am I unwilling to sacrifice to achieve this goal? Any questions?
What's the vision? And the first question, what is the vision to which you allude?
The general plan's mobility goals reflect the community's desire to enhance its long-standing strategy of supporting alternative ways of travel and transit-oriented development. The city's long-term approach is to pursue innovative strategies to provide efficient and adequate parking and to consider parking pricing to support alternative travel modes. That's the vision that we're talking about. So shorter, there's a vision reflected in the general plan to enhance the long-standing strategy of supporting alternative ways of travel and transit-oriented development. That's the vision. Ken, do I have it?
You got it.
Okay. Okay, please. discuss.
discovered that to go from Old Mountain View, where we lived at the time, to Embarcadero and 101 by the office park where his company was, 2 hours. It was just ridiculous. So, yeah, much to our shock, we thought we were living close to work, and we wouldn't need a second car. So I think the whole issue of public transportation is, bike lanes are lovely, people live close are lovely, but believe me, we know people are getting onto 280, 85, 101 because they don't live a mile away. And without public transportation, El Camino is just a thoroughfare, and Google is its own problems. We haven't solved anything with bike lanes, and we haven't solved anything with green lines, except obviously safety and all these issues. But again, and that to me is kind of the elephant in the room: is density and public transportation. I've lived in urban centers, my whole life. Nothing works without public transportation, which we don't. It doesn't look like we're getting, in my opinion, from what I've seen.
And I'm Marlene Sloper. And I live in
So I'm starting to see the vision now. We already have the same or more people on bicycles as Portland, and I'm starting to see pile-ups of bicycles at the intersection at Moffett and Central Expressway. It's surprising how many people are clogging up that area, and it's making it difficult for people making right turns in their cars. We just had a discussion about that at one of our meetings recently. So I think what we're going to see is more people packed onto Caltrain, and I've nearly been bumped off of Caltrain in the morning getting on because the whole row is packed already for the bullet trains, and that's not bicycles, that's just regular people getting on. Yeah, well, individuals aren't getting bumped. It's bicycles that will get bumped, but it's a full train going up. It's packed out. So we're already seeing the growth in Mountain View for our public transportation, or at least the inner city public transportation. So I think that's a clue to us about what it's going to be like when we increase density, and we can just expect more of the same.
Well, yes, I'm John. And so I think that the vision would be where we have folks who do live close or want to go and take their kids to school or something. We have a safe way that people could do that. And so, like what I noticed at our school is we have, on the bike days, we have 40% of the people riding bike, or 40% of the kids getting there by bike. or by walking. So Stevenson Pact Elementary. And what I see is we have a generation of kids at our school who do ride their bikes. I understand in the high schools and middle schools are not as much, but I think it'll be a generational change where you have people who will be more active and kind of versus the folks who are more computer oriented and maybe don't get out of the house. But I think if we make the infrastructure for them so that it'll be safe and you can have people riding to errands, or, you know, going downtown to see play or something, or to the library, that would be just really great for health, for just getting out in the open and reduce congestion.
To you, if this was implemented, what kinds of things do you see that we would need to do? For example, would we need to increase our police force? You know, if we're going to make sure that it's safe.
Well, I think that what you do is you just engineer the system so that it will be safe. So if we have a system of bike paths and pedestrian access that is separated from the car. So what you want to do is you want to have...
But a couple of things that I want to just remind people. You're in a group of, 10 people, right? So just, be mindful. If you're doing more talking than listening, you're doing a lot of talking. And I'm not saying anybody is. I haven't noticed that, but I'm just reminding people. Secondly, I don't usually call people out if they haven't said anything, because that never works well. Like, hey you, why haven't you talked? That's not a good way to get someone who not very comfortable talking. So, but I will encourage you, if you haven't weighed in yet, then I would just encourage you to do that, because we're coming into the last part of the discussion. So if you haven't said anything, get in there. And maybe that's not a problem for any of you all.
Okay.
And we're going to
So I
do
guess
this
to be
for about
very,
another
very
10,
quick,
maybe 15
I just see
minutes.
it that you would have
So get
you
to
build
the
the infrastructure
question
so that you
about
could allow people
what is your personal
to
response?
choose
What
to ride or
commitment
to
am I
walk.
willing to make or
And so
not
it'll be
willing to
pleasant
make
and safe to do so
for
by
this larger
separating
vision?
the heavy
Thank you all.
vehicles from the light vehicles like bikes from the pedestrians, so that no matter what mode of transport you or wheelchairs, so you'd have whatever mode you wanted to use, you could do so safely.
Again, I think the primary issue is the fact that people who have access to and use of physically and in terms of distance for bikes, that they filter the problem through this vision. And people who don't use bikes are focusing on the other issues, which is the highways, the how many lights we have, whether things are timed, what do we do with the thousands of commuters that come into the community and the thousands that are going out. And I think, again, that's part of the problem, is that we have this dual issue that we can't really address. We need to address them all. But that, I think, the question, what bothers me about all of these meetings is that we never have any transportation people here. The VTA people are not here. The Caltrains people are not here, and saying, well, good luck. You're never going to get more than 2 cars per train. We're never going to add more than 5 trains ever. So this is your problem, and it's never going to get any better. Add all the people you want. We've done all we can do. So that's, to me, the vision is that the transportation people would be in the community, making the commitments, making the plans, and telling people what's possible before we allow the developers to come in and start increasing density, and then leave us with the problem of what do we do. So I don't think we can say what do you need to do until we know what can be done to alleviate the whole community issue of congestion. And obviously bicycles are important, but that's within the community. What about all the people coming from outside?
But I think we need to move on to the next question.
I just want to say one thing parenthetically, and that's that, this city belongs to the residents who live here. It's okay. Oh, okay. The city belongs to the residents who live here. They need to make the choices about what they want it to be. It shouldn't be dictated to them. Okay, each council election, their new people can come on to council, and you need to make a decision about who you want there to lead your city to be what it should be. So be informed and make those decisions. Now, one thing I'll say is there's been a lot of discussion, I think a lot of very good discussion in The Voice about our housing, jobs, and balance. And unless you go to these like 30-story buildings that Ron Duradon's talking about, and I don't think most people want Mountain View to be that, we're not going to have a balance between housing and jobs. And because we're not, we need to be thinking about what limits we want to have on how much office space we're going to have here. And we also need to be thinking in terms of how are we going to get the people who aren't going to be living here in and out in an effective way, to make our community still a livable place. That's, to me, a key issue. So I would just say the most hopeful thing I've seen recently is this idea of a Transportation Management Association of companies in our area, and that will be moving in the direction of providing, just as people gobble up free parking, we need to be moving to gobbling up free public transportation, because that's where you need to put it to get people to want to use it. And, I think that the people who are asking for, this increase in the density and all this, that has to be, they have to be there with support, both financially and morally, and also they need to be working, with innovative ideas to make that a reality. So those are my thoughts.
I think I have some different viewpoints from Robert, but I think we agree in the main. When I say that I'm going to be working 3 miles from my house, I should say that I've been a bike commuter for 15 or 16 or 17 years, living in Mountain View for 18 years, and I used to bike 10 miles each way to North San Jose. So I don't think I agree with the way of splitting the issue between all the people in Mountain View can bike commute. But what about the other people who don't live here? I think that's false. I think I know the vast majority of bike commuters that I have known over those 17 years have biked from one community through another community and sometimes through a third community to get to where they. So I think people who don't bike habitually might be surprised as to the resourcefulness and the determination of people who do get on their bikes. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean in an informative way. Biking is really not just for the people in Mountain View. I also believe that the people who bike here from other communities have a stake in these decisions that we're making. I think it's a flaw in our process and our discussions. We think that we own this discussion. In fact, we are a part of a larger community. Each one of those people is a stakeholder. And I don't mean to sound negative. I actually feel quite positive about this. But I listen to the way that people construct the issues, and I find it interesting. And I also find it that we maybe place limits on ourselves based on where we've been in the last 30 years. This is all we know. This is all we know about how to discuss these issues. And the vision that I see, I wonder why we don't build out El Camino with a lot of high-rise apartment buildings. El Camino is a huge corridor, zero quality of life issues, no trade-offs there. There's nothing to be traded off anymore, frankly. Build those things, put public transit up and down El Camino so that people can travel at will, they can walk to Whole Foods. I don't know, there's a lot of good stuff there, but there's frankly so much traffic there now, I don't see the trade-off. I really don't. And then for people in Cuesta Park neighborhood, I think you have it tough right now. I think you have it tough because there really is no transit. And it's sort of the 50s vision of sort of these large lots with these huge boulevards. And I don't really know what the vision is there, but I feel your pain.
In Cuesta Park.
2 minute 2-minute warning.
Just say one thing. Again, but that's what I'm saying is, though, that it's not a question of transportation on El Camino. If you lived in a high-rise on El Camino, you got off down by the Walgreens by 85, you would stand there until you were old and gray, and there would be no way to get to Cupertino or Saratoga or anything down to 80 or 85. So the point is that it's not a question of just bikes, and it's not a question of just high-rise. Again, it's a question of the transportation infrastructure so that you can live here and get somewhere without a car. It's not a question of can you get anywhere with a bike, of course. And my husband rides his bike too when he can. But it doesn't mean we still don't have a car sitting in the driveway. And so that's the problem, is we don't have the infrastructure to go from Mountain View to Cupertino to Apple to Saratoga to everywhere, Los Gatos. And so therefore, you go down El Camino, and I drive from Menlo Park to Mountain View, and it can take 45 minutes to an hour, what it can normally take 15 minutes, because it's a thoroughfare. And that's what I think the vision needs to be, is for public transportation, so people can treat this like an urban region.
I kind of agree with Louise there. Our infrastructure really was, Mountain View was built and designed more around the 1950s, 1970s. We're living with that infrastructure now, and it wasn't built for bikes, although I'm not against them at all. But it wasn't built for bikes, it wasn't built for bikes and traffic, and it wasn't built for high-density stuff around here. We're growing up very quickly, and we have a lot of problems to solve to make everybody be able to be copacetic and live together. It's going to be hard.
I was thinking about the El Camino. There is no public transportation. I mean, if you call a bus public transportation, I don't think that's public transportation. There should be something already in place, like a Caltrain or some kind of something there. There's nothing there. I mean, why are you going to put high-density housing and assume there's somehow God will put down a... Exactly. I mean, what are you praying for? I mean, yeah, I mean, Google buses everywhere, just driving people around. Put in a reel. But in 5 years from now, I don't think so. But yeah, I'm thinking only long term, because I have to assume the developers can get away with a lot of stuff, and then maybe 75% of what they want, and then we have to think about 5-10 years. We're not going to have an infrastructure of mass transit, because we're not even thinking about it now. If you don't think about it right this second, how you put the bike grids, you have to have bike grids. You have to have the public transportation grids. I mean, there's no grids. There's a line through El Camino. There's a line through Central Expressway. You have to mass transit network. No bus. Yeah, it's a packed Caltrain. Where are you going to go?
So the third question is, achieving this goal of encouraging alternative forms of transportation important to me, to each one of us? And if it is, what are you willing to sacrifice in the short term to achieve? Or if not, what do you not want to
I could sacrifice a little density if there were public transportation which got people
All right,
out of their
everybody, I'm
cars
committed to
and,
getting you all...
walking. So.
I'm committed to this event being over by 9. You guys can continue, but I can do it. So what we're going to do is wrap up a concluding comment.
I'm going to yell over him. One more comment.
Okay, let's see. Okay.
I just want to say we are going to have trouble moving everybody around. And if we can use the appropriate form of transportation for the thing we need to do, walk our kids to school instead of driving them there. And
Okay, everyone, that's the concluding comment. We're done. We're going to be done with this part of the.
Can get out of town quicker. If we can push for public transportation, that's probably the best solution that we can find.
So it's a great sign that every time I try to bring you all back, it's difficult to do. That's a good thing. I've got to do it because there's a commitment to end on time for both the staff here and for all of you around the room. So I'm going to continue to talk until, because there's an element that if I continue to talk and you continue to talk, then there's a problem. No. Nope. Okay. Nope. Nope. So you can just exactly. So everybody, we're gonna wrap up with a couple of things now, and you're more than happy to continue this conversation after we're done. So one of the things we want to do as a tradition here is we're not going to rearrange the seats or anything, but just from a couple of groups, right? We're not doing flip charts, and we're not going to do those 50 pages of notes on flip charts that no one ever looks at after the meeting and all that other stuff. But what would be interesting is, out of a couple of the groups, did something come up for you that you thought was interesting, that you thought was a possibility that you hadn't thought of before? Just to have a couple people just tell us what's been coming up, what was most interesting about your conversation or most helpful about it, or what did you learn as a result? Please.
There if you don't have a car, or somebody drives you, or somebody picks you up. In Stanford, the parking has been reduced and the ridership on mass transit increased because they've had that little Marguerite shuttle bus. So until we come up with some major plan of increasing transit to get people from here to there or parking, why can't Mountain View have small shuttles that get people who are not on the Caltrain route or near El Camino to get them to the buses and to the mass transit?
Great, thank you. Other possibilities that came up for people in the conversation? Please. Hold it, I think we got the microphone going, so we're gonna, makes you very official.
A woman in our group suggested that there's a lot of free parking right now, and I guess one place she's heard of has replaced free parking with free transit, or I'm botching this, but I thought that was interesting.
The thought was, I've heard this expression, the high cost of free parking, and tonight I heard free transit should be our goal. So I thought, what if we replaced free parking with free transit? Just a what if exercise.
We like what ifs. One more. Oh. Oh, yes, we got it. We absolutely.
Hi there. Just what came out from the group from my perspective is, if you're going to start charging for parking, the first thing you've got to do is establish and make sure you've got viable alternatives for folks. An example we have, we always talk about parking and cash out and things like that, but the truth is we've only got one transit bus that comes through North Bay Shore every hour. And so we got to make sure that the infrastructure can support the alternatives if you are going to go down the charging for parking path.
Great, thank you. A couple of practical considerations. This as you know, has been filmed. The webcast of this will be on the City of Mountain View's homepage, the link to it. And we apologize, there were some people who who heard better than others, and et cetera. So hopefully that'll be a chance to hear some of the comments again. You have evaluations. City staff has asked you to fill that out. I want to give a special thank you to city staff and the rest of the people who really make this possible, who do a great job doing that. I'm really appreciative. I also want to thank the cheese lady from Milk Pail for the delicious I would thank Starbucks, but I mean, who cares? So, I'm kidding. Thank you to Starbucks as well. I'm just a little joke, people. So I also just want to, before I turn it over for the official wrap-up, want to just make really a final, very brief comment. You know, sometimes some people leave and say, well, gee, all we did today was talk, right? And, you know, when this country was founded, it was founded initially by a group of people who just talked. They got together in small groups like we're doing today, and they just talked. They talked about the difference between paid parking and free transit. Well, they didn't really, because there was no cars at that point, but they talked about, they just talked. They talked about, free horse parking. But they just talked. And one of the things that we do here is we talk, but one of the real great things about Mountain View is that when you're in these places talking, there are people in each of your groups who are actually pretty close to making decisions based on this talk. So there's this direct impact that we have. So I want to thank you for just talking, but actually engaging what is really the basic vehicle of democracy. And it's great to be with you all and to be with a group of citizens who are willing to spend a couple hours on a Wednesday night because they care about their community. So thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, let's have a round of applause for Chris Block and all the people in the Fishbowl. I'd like to thank Chris Block, all the people that took part in the Fishbowl, all the people that came out tonight. It's great to see so many friendly faces and to hear so many interesting conversations. With that, I'm going to get back to the script and adjourn the meeting. Item 6 is commission and staff comments, questions, and commission reports. I don't expect any of those. And so then we'll adjourn the official Human Relations Commission meeting at 8:55 p.m. Thank you for coming.